Hello and welcome to another Roblox tutorial. So in this video, I will show you how to make one of the best systems for saving and loading player data. This is the system that I use in all of my games and that a lot of developers use in their games. Please note that this system was actually first created by the Roblox devs. They have an article about it on their wiki. I will link that in the description. So let's get right in. So for this tutorial, we're going to be using a module script to store our player data in game, and it'll also be responsible for saving it through a data store. And if you guys don't know what data stores are, I have two videos actually about that. I will link that right now and in the description. So first thing we're going to do is going to server storage and create a module script. And I'm going to name this script player handler. It doesn't matter the name. Name it whatever you like, but that's the name that I usually go with. And so to make this easier, we're going to change the default table to player handler. So the first thing we want to do is define a table, and this table is going to be called session data. And so what this table is going to be responsible for is going to be responsible for storing all of our players' information. Because if you don't know, using dictionaries, which is basically where you have a key and a value as a table, you can store like other like nested tables within your single dictionary. So this will allow us to store all of our players' data in a single table. So now that we have that, the first thing we want to do after that is create a function. And we're going to name this function player handler dot change value. This is going to take in a few arguments: the player, the name of the value, and the value that we want to change. This will be for other scripts trying to access our script, and if they want to change something about like the player's data. So in this script, we're just going to define the player user ID. It's going to be the player dot user ID. So the next thing we want to do is check if our player is in our session data. So we're going to do if session data player user ID, then what we're going to do in here is do session data player user ID, and then the name equals the value. So what this is going to do is for whatever value we set our, or like whatever value we want to set and whatever name we want, we go into our player's specific like storage table, which we will make in just a second. We access the name of the value that we want to change, and we set that to a value. We first have to check that our player actually has stored data. So this should work good. And this is going to be the only function that we will expose to other scripts if they want to use it. So the next function that we're going to define is a local function, and it's going to be set up player data. If I can type set up player data, it's going to take our player. And so in this function, we are going to first define the user ID again, player's ID, player.user ID. And then we're going to set session data player user ID to a new table with like the default values that you want. So let's say you have a money variable, set that to 0 as default. And let's say you have inventory, you can set that to a like blank table. And you could put as many tables nested in other tables as you want. And so now that we have this function set up, let's define the player service and hook this up to a player added event. So I'll go player service equals game get service players, and then we can at the bottom here we can do player service dot player added connect setup player data, and make sure not to put parentheses down here because the script will error, it'll be a syntax error. So make sure it's only the function name, no parentheses. So what will happen when the player joins, it'll connect this function, which will give the player these default values. And these default values can then be changed by this function. And it can add on to them, set them, whatever. And if you're wondering how you implement this with data stats, what I would do is I would just add another function that just like uses the change value function, but it also takes in like the just the leader stat, and it can like set the value and get the value and like add stuff. So yeah, you can do that. And that is our basic setup good to go. So now let's actually start getting into the data store aspect of the script. So first thing I'm going to define is our data store service. Goes game get service data store service. Boom, there we go. Data store service has been added. So next thing we want to do is get our player data store. And so with this example, we are only going to be using one data store. The only reason you should ever use more than one data store, especially if you're a high-level coder, is when you need to use an order data store. Because using this kind of table idea, you can store an infinitely large number, I mean, technically not infinite, but like a sort of infinitely large number of values, more than you'll ever need in like whatever table you have. And it relieves stress on the server. So that's always super, super, super good. And so we're going to define our player data. It's going to be data store service get data store. Let's just use player data. You can name this whatever you want. This will just be the name of your data store that you want to access. So next thing we have to do is set up a function to save our player data. So let's do local function save data. So what this is going to do is we actually have to get the player. And so what we're going to do in this function is set async, which is a function of our data store, our like key, which is going to be our player name, and we're going to the value is going to be their little table that we set up earlier. So let's do that right now. First thing we're going to define is a user ID, and then we want to define a variable local success error message. Actually, we don't need this variable, my bad. Equals pcall function parentheses end. There you go. Make sure to have your end parentheses right here. So if you can recall from the past data store videos, you have to use pcall because data stores are very finicky. They sometimes error your scripts, so this prevents your scripts from erroring. And this success is just going to be a boolean that if the pcall succeeds, it'll return true. If it does not, it will return false. And in this, what we can do is we can get our player data set async, and our key is going to be the player user ID, and the value is going to be session data player user ID. So what this is going to do is it's going to go to our data source, get the key is going to be our player user ID, and the value is going to be a table that we defined up here with our like whatever default values you want. So in this case, it'll store 0 as money and inventory as whatever, but it'll store this whole entire table. So whatever you have in this, it'll all store it in a single data store like value. So that's super good. So all that's left with this function is to connect it to the player service dot player removed, and we can connect our save data function to that. So there we go. And so we have our setting up player data and our saving player data. So the next thing we have to do is actually get our player data. And we're actually going to go back into the setup player data because that's where we should do it. So we're going to define our data. Local data is going to be, we're not going to set it to anything. And we're going to do local success equals pcall function. And then we're going to set data to our player data store, get async, and our key is going to be, of course, be the player user ID. So This will, what is it? Oh, capitalization issue. Whoops, there we go. So this will access our player data store, get the key of our player user ID, and hopefully not error. And the next thing we got to do is check if success. So if everything's successful, and then I'm going to wrap this. I will show you why in a second. And we're also going to check if data. So if they have player data, and then add a little else here, and then we'll put this right here. And if they have data, then session data player user ID equals data. So what this will do is it'll basically check if it's successful. Technically, if you encounter errors in your game, I actually forgot and sorry, give me a sec. Off topic, my bad, because I did not put enough ends. But technically, you can put this line outside of this if statement or out like if success else. But I've never encountered errors with that, so I think I like this setup. So basically what happens is if our player has saved data, then we set our session data little table up here, that we set their user ID to the data value. And if they don't, we give them a little default sleep. And this will also happen if an error occurs. So yeah, that could be a problem. But if a player leaves and rejoins, it might fix itself. So that works great. So yeah, that is your advanced data store done. You can also add an autosave system. If you want that, make sure to comment that down below. I've gotten mixed results with autosave. On the one hand, it's like nice and safe. You get to save all of your data repeatedly, but it also stresses out the Roblox servers. So it just depends. But now I will show you a quick example of how to use this like actually in your. So I have a super simple example utilizing this system where I actually use a script to require our player handler module script. So first thing, make sure to change player removed to player removing. I made that mistake. Make sure to change that. And so here's my setup. I have a basic script located in server script service where I require the player handler. When a player is added, I wait a second, then change their money value. So let's just change this to something like 50 because it was set to 10 before. And I print their money value when they join the game. So I load in. The game will print my money value as 10. And when I leave it, it'll save it as 50 since I set 50 in the script. So if I load back in, you can see it's set to 50. So that doesn't work great. Works great. So you can do this with leader stats. You can do this with whatever you want. This system is so good. I use it for all of my games. It works very, very, very well. It's such a nice system. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is very useful for every game. You should use this in every game that you make. If you understand. If you don't understand it, then make sure to check out my last Datastore video where I go over a little simpler approach. But this approach definitely gives you the best results. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to comment any questions down below and make any suggestions. And have a nice day and goodbye.